He was slumped on a park bench, a midnight tuxedo wrinkled, tie undone, reeking of whiskey and heartbreak. Most people walked past him like he didn't exist, but she didn't. A waitress on her way home stopped, handed him a cup of tea, and said, "You shouldn't be alone tonight." She didn't ask who he was, didn't know he was worth millions, or that his bride had just left him at the altar. And yet, something about her made him stay still. If you believe that the quietest moments can change everything, like share or leave a comment, sometimes stories like this are how we remember what still matters. The rain didn't just fall, it pounded. Lincoln Park had emptied hours ago, except for the occasional runner too stubborn to turn back. The old benches were slick with water, the gravel paths soaked into mud, and the air smelled of pine needles and something bitter, like metal. Sarah wrapped her cardigan tighter, phone in hand, waiting for her Uber to ping green. It was just past midnight, her last delivery done, and the leftover espresso warming her tote. That's when she saw him, slumped on the far bench beneath a crooked lamppost, soaked like he'd been forgotten by the world. A man, mid-30s maybe, tall even folded like that. His shirt, once white, clung to his chest like paper. His eyes were closed, lips slightly parted, not sleeping, not moving, just gone somewhere else. She hesitated. She'd seen her share of drunks after closing shift, some loud, some passed out, some aggressive. But something about him was different. There was no bottle, no staggering trail, just stillness. She took a step closer. His hand was curled around a velvet box, the kind used for rings, crushed and soggy in his palm. She almost kept walking, almost told herself it wasn't her business, but the warmth of the thermos on her hip reminded her of something her dad, maybe, how he used to say, "No one wants to be saved." But sometimes they need a cup of coffee before they remember that. Sarah knelt and unscrewed the lid, the steam curled up between them. She poured carefully into a paper cup and set it near his knee. His eyes opened, bloodshot. Yes, but not lost. They were a strange gray blue, like river stones beneath moving water. He blinked once, then croaked, "Thanks." His voice had weight, like he'd been carrying something heavy all day and finally put it down. She didn't answer, just sat at the far end of the bench, 2 feet between them. No words. The rain softened for a moment, tapping lightly on leaves above. "I didn't expect it to feel this empty," he said. "Being left, still no name, still no questions." Sarah glanced sideways. "I didn't expect to still be handing out coffee at midnight, but here we are." A corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. They sat a while longer, the silence comfortable in its own strange way. She could have asked what happened. She could have offered advice, or sympathy, or the blanket she kept in the car, but she didn't. That wasn't what he needed. Not tonight. She rose first. He didn't move. She turned once, looked back through the mist, but he was already looking past her, into the trees, into something she couldn't see. He didn't ask for her name. She didn't ask for his. She walked away, boots sinking slightly into the wet grass. By the time her car arrived, she was shivering. She wrapped herself in the blanket anyway and watched the rearview mirror. The man on the bench never moved, but something about the way he held that cup made her pause. She didn't look back again, but somehow, she knew he would remember. Rain lingered in the streets like an echo. Puddles stretched across the sidewalk outside Wicker Park Coffee Co., glinting under a gray sky that hadn't quite cleared since last night. Inside, the hum of the espresso machine softened the mood, mixing with the faint jazz playing through the speaker above the counter. Sarah moved through her usual morning rhythm, measuring beans, grinding, tamping, pulling shots. Her hands followed every step by muscle memory, but her mind lagged behind. She kept thinking about the man on the bench, not what he looked like exactly, but how still he had been, how broken. There had been something too deliberate about the way he sat, as if being there wasn't accidental. He wasn't drunk in the ordinary sense. He was holding on to something, barely. Sarah tried to shake it off. She didn't even know his name. And still, Her hand trembled slightly when she sprinkled cinnamon over the mocha for Mr. Callahan, a retired attorney who stopped by every morning at 7:15. He didn't notice. People rarely noticed small tremors, 10 miles away, in a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. Thomas Reed sat on the floor of his living room. The space was sleek, modern, designed to impress. But at that moment, it felt hollow, like the inside of a glass he couldn't fill. The tuxedo he'd worn yesterday was draped over a leather armchair, wrinkled, mud-stained at the cuff. The bow tie lay in a knot on the floor beside it. His phone was face down, silent. The last text from Vanessa. "This isn't about you. I just can't do this" had been deleted. So had the dozen others that followed. Thomas hadn't called anyone, not even his assistant, not even his brother. Instead, he found himself pacing, then sitting, then standing again. He couldn't stay here, not in this life he had built to impress everyone but himself. He opened his closet, grabbed the first jacket he saw, an old military-style one from college, and left. Back at the cafe, the lunch rush had yet to begin. Sarah was wiping down the condiment station when the door creaked open. The bell didn't ring. It had come loose last month, and no one had gotten around to fixing it. She looked up. There he was, the man from the park. Only now he was standing upright, clean-shaven, though his eyes still looked like they hadn't slept. His clothes didn't match the neighborhood's rhythm, faded jeans, boots too worn for winter, and that old army green jacket. But he wasn't out of place. Not exactly. Just misplaced. "Morning," he said. Sarah nodded, polite but cautious. "You okay?" He looked around the cafe. "I was wondering if you're hiring." Elaine, the cafe's owner, emerged from the back at just that moment. She was in her 60s, stern but fair, with a no-nonsense bun and glasses hanging from a beaded chain. She gave the man a quick once-over, then glanced at Sarah. "We're not really..." Elaine started. "I'll clean tables. Take trash out. I don't need much," he said. Sarah surprised herself. "We could use someone part-time. Just mornings. It gets busy." Elaine raised an eyebrow. "He's your friend." "No," Sarah said, "but he made it through last night." Elaine didn't ask what that meant. She just stared at the man a moment longer, then said, "Name." He hesitated. "Jake." Elaine scribbled something on the clipboard near the register. "Fill that out. First shift's tomorrow." He nodded, then turned to Sarah. "Thanks." She didn't smile, but something in her eyes shifted, just slightly. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. He filled out the form quietly, his handwriting neat, almost too formal for someone claiming to be down on his luck. Sarah noticed. She noticed a lot more than she let on. When he left, she found herself watching through the window. He didn't walk fast, just steady, like someone used to walking alone. She didn't say anything to Elaine, and Elaine didn't say anything to her, but when she checked the name he'd written on the form, it said Jake Carson, no middle name, no emergency contact, just a phone number. The pen stroke on the C looked familiar, controlled. She tore off the slip and put it in the drawer. She didn't look back, but something told her. Neither did he. The next morning, Wicker Park Coffee Co. opened at 6 sharp. Elaine was already behind the counter, sleeves rolled, glasses perched halfway down her nose as she ran the numbers from yesterday's till. Sarah arrived a few minutes after, breath visible in the early February air. The cafe was still quiet, the kind of lull that came before the day's rhythm took hold. Jake stood awkwardly by the bar sink, a beige apron hanging limp in his hands. Elaine handed it to him like a test. Her eyes scanned him, boots that didn't match, a jacket that had seen better winters, a face that somehow didn't quite belong to either category of young or old, just tired. "Don't spill anything on it," she said, and turned away. Jake slipped the apron over his head. It didn't fit quite right. The strap caught on his shoulder, and he had to fumble it loose. Hands unfamiliar with this kind of fabric. Sarah noticed. She didn't say anything at first. Then she pointed to the register. "Start here," she said. "It's older than you think. So go slow. He nodded, took a step closer, and hesitated. I haven't used one of these before. She showed him, patient but brisk. The trick isn't the buttons, it's the timing. You hit this too fast, and the drawer sticks. Jake listened carefully. He didn't ask many questions, but he watched her hands, how she tapped and pulled, how she wiped the counter with small, efficient circles. After 20 minutes, he tried it himself, slowly. He got the drawer open on the first try. Sarah half smiled. Not bad. I've signed billion-dollar deals, he said, deadpan. This might be harder. She chuckled, despite herself. That was the first moment something shifted. Throughout the morning, Jake moved table to table, taking trays back, rinsing pitchers. His steps were cautious, deliberate. There was a clumsy charm to the way he tried to blend in, a man used to corner offices, now carrying 2 cappuccinos and apologizing for spilling one. Elaine watched from behind the espresso bar, unimpressed but curious. Sarah caught her eye once and shrugged. At 11, the rush picked up. A line stretched toward the door, and the regulars grew louder. Jake moved faster now, remembering orders, repeating names with surprising accuracy. When he set down a soy latte for a woman with a stroller, she blinked. Thanks, Jake. Right. He nodded. You got it. Sarah leaned in while fixing a drip order. You remembered hers? He shrugged. She orders soy because the baby's allergic. The cup had a smiley face drawn on it. Must be routine. You notice things, she said, a little surprised. Contracts are all about detail, he said, and then added, so is loneliness. It wasn't a line, just something he said, something that hung there, unfinished. The day slowed down by 2. Elaine went to the back office. Sarah started restocking the sweetener trays. Jake carried the last tray in and paused near the coat hooks, where Sarah's bag sat slouched on the low shelf. The canvas bag was open. Something inside caught his eye, an old photo, half slid out of a worn envelope. A man in a brown suit, smiling with his arm around a younger girl in a school uniform. The background looked like Humboldt Park. The man's face, it hit Jake like a bell in the back of his head. He knew that face. He couldn't place it yet, but it stirred something buried. He slipped the photo back without touching it further, stepped away. Sarah walked out from the storeroom just then, wiping her hands on her jeans. You done for the day? Yeah, he said. Thanks for showing me the ropes. She grabbed her bag without noticing the photo out of place. Don't thank me yet. Let's see how you handle the Saturday crowd. He didn't respond, but she caught something in his expression as he turned toward the door. Not regret, not fear, recognition. He said nothing, just stood there, watching the rain hit the sidewalk, like it could wash away everything they hadn't said. The cafe was quiet that evening, the kind of stillness that only came when the espresso machine had cooled and the last chair had been flipped onto the table. Outside, the streetlights cast a gold sheen on the sidewalk, and the windows fogged slightly from the residual warmth inside. Jake sat in the corner booth by the window, the same place he'd settled into since his first day. He liked the angle it gave him, just enough of a view to see the street without being seen too easily. His coffee had gone cold, untouched for over half an hour. His hands stayed clasped in front of him, knuckles resting lightly against the rim of the cup. He hadn't moved since Sarah left for the night. She'd forgotten a scarf he saw it hanging from the hook near the back door. He hadn't touched it. His mind was stuck on the photo. The man in the brown suit, smiling next to a young girl. It had taken him a full day to place the face, but now it came back with a weight he hadn't expected. Edward Martinez. Jake remembered the boardroom, a sterile, windowless conference room in Reed Corporation's old Loop office. The paper on the table had been a merger agreement, but it wasn't a merger at all. His father had orchestrated the entire thing to bleed the smaller company, dry pressuring Martinez to sell off assets or lose everything in a competitive city bid. Jake had read the memo, even voiced his doubts, but he hadn't stopped it. No one had. The deal had closed. Martinez lost his company. A year later, he suffered a stroke and never recovered. Jake hadn't thought about him since. And now, that man's daughter was folding napkins beside him, showing him how to run a filter line and calling out drink orders over the grinder. Jake had felt something shift that morning, watching her joke with Elaine, watching how the customers lingered longer after she smiled at them. It wasn't pity that stirred in him now. It was shame. He stood abruptly, the wooden bench scraping against the tile. He needed air. Outside. The night was colder than he remembered. The wind off Milwaukee Avenue bit at his skin. He walked a few blocks without thinking, hands deep in his jacket pockets, head low. The streets weren't empty, but he might as well have been invisible. A couple passed by holding hands, arguing softly about whether to order takeout. A man in a delivery vest unlocked his bike from a post. Life moved on, unaware. Jake paused at the corner of Domin and Pierce, where a mural of a young girl holding a paintbrush covered the wall of an old barbershop. The colors were faded, but the expression in the girl's eyes remained curious, unafraid. He wondered if Sarah had painted as a child, if Martinez had ever told her about the company, or if she had only learned the fallout. Would she hate the name Reed if she knew he took a breath and turned around? Back to the cafe, back to the booth where his coffee still waited. The place was empty when he returned, save for Elaine locking up in the back. She didn't ask why he was there, just nodded once and handed him the scarf Sarah had left behind. "You should probably give that to her tomorrow," she said. "Looks like she actually likes this one." He nodded, folded it carefully, and placed it in his coat. In the quiet, he moved toward the coat hooks again. The canvas bag was gone, but the photo stayed in his mind like a weight pressed to his chest. He wouldn't ask Sarah, not yet, but something told him she deserved to know the truth. He turned out the light behind the counter and stepped outside once more, scarf in pocket, and too many truths heavy in his throat. She didn't look back, but he knew. Something had changed. The air in Chicago that morning bit a little sharper than usual, the kind of chill that sank past coats and into the skin. Sarah arrived early, bundled in a second-hand wool coat and boots a half size too big. The cafe was already lit from inside. Through the fogged-up window, she saw Jake moving with steady rhythm, wiping down the bar, refilling the sugar jars, aligning the stools along the wall. The same man who'd stumbled through the first day now folded napkins with the ease of someone who'd done this his whole life. And yet, he hadn't. When she pushed open the door, the warm scent of cinnamon and espresso wrapped around her. He looked up, gave her a small nod, then returned to restocking the stirrers. No greeting, just a quiet acknowledgement. She liked that about him. "Early shift," she asked, slipping off her gloves. "Figured I'd beat the crowd," he said, "and Elaine said we're low on filters." She raised an eyebrow. "You remember that I remember small things," he said. "They help you avoid big mistakes." Sarah moved to the back to sort out the overstocked shelves. They hadn't been touched in weeks. Half the boxes were labeled in fading marker, and there was an old carton of holiday mugs buried behind a crate of biscotti. She pulled one free, accidentally jostling a cardboard box above. It teetered, then dropped with a dull thud. The crash startled her. A porcelain dish, part of Elaine's vintage collection, had shattered against the concrete. Sarah bent quickly, brushing shards into a pile with her sleeve. "Shoot, Elaine's going to kill me," before she could gather the rest. Jake appeared beside her, kneeling without a word. He picked up the largest piece, turned it in his hand, and gently placed it on the shelf beside them. "It happens," he said, his voice low. As he leaned forward to reach another shard, the back of his sweater lifted slightly. Sarah caught it in a blink. A scar, faint but unmistakable, cut across his shoulder blade. Not fresh. Years old. It curved with the shape of his spine, pale against his skin. She didn't ask, but she knew he noticed her seeing it. "Car accident," he said quietly. 7 years ago, a bridge collapsed. Her hand paused mid-reach. A bridge on the west side. Steel frame gave out. They said the mix was off cheap cement. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sarah's mouth went dry. "Was that your project?" "No," he said, standing slowly. But my name was on the blueprint. I didn't know the materials were cut. I should have. He said nothing else. The weight in his voice lingered. She looked away, returning to the broken dish. Somehow, that moment between them, sparse, unfilled, spoke louder than any apology. The rest of the day passed with fewer words. They worked side by side, their movements quiet but synchronized. At one point, she noticed he had started folding towels the way she did 2 creases, corner in. Something about that detail stayed with her longer than it should have. Late in the afternoon, after the last rush of college students had filed out, Jake walked to the back, coat in hand. He placed a small envelope on the counter cash, folded twice. Rent for the week, maybe more. Thanks for the shift, he said. You leaving early, she asked, not quite hiding the disappointment. Need to check in at the shelter. Rules are strict about curfews. She nodded. Right, of course. He adjusted his collar, but didn't turn to leave just yet. You handled the dish well, he said. Some people panic. It's just the plate, she answered. No. He said, it wasn't. She didn't know what to say to that. He stepped out into the cold. She watched from behind the espresso machine, pretending to rinse a pitcher. He walked with hands in his pockets, his head low, coat flapping in the wind. Just before he turned the corner, he glanced back once, briefly. She didn't look away, but he didn't see her face. By late afternoon, the cafe smelled like oranges and cinnamon, with a hint of polish from the freshly wiped tabletops. Sarah had come in early to help hang the string lights Jake brought in from a thrift store on Damen. They looped across the back patio like low stars, dangling just enough to make people look up when they passed underneath. The air was brisk, but not sharp. Elaine lit 3 standing heaters and moved chairs to face the makeshift stage near the garden wall. Jake had suggested it offhand, a quiet comment between sips of his second coffee one morning. Acoustic night, he'd said. We could bring people in again, feel more like a neighborhood spot, not just a stop on the way to somewhere else. He didn't pitch it like a plan, but more like a memory. Sarah had just nodded. She hadn't realized she wanted it, too. By 7, the cafe was packed, every table filled, the warmth of bodies and breath and low conversation pressing against the windows. Sarah was behind the bar, sleeves rolled to her elbows, moving faster than usual, but with a certain rhythm she hadn't felt in months. Jake was everywhere, clearing mugs, handing out menus, refilling water, folding napkins, and sliding plates into the bin with practiced ease. The crowd skewed younger than usual. Students from DePaul, couples with scarves looped over their arms, a few families with kids on their phones. The buzz felt different, intentional, alive. When the lights dimmed slightly and the first chord hummed through the speaker, Sarah looked up. Jake wasn't beside the espresso machine like she expected. He was outside, sitting with the band. He wasn't in the center, not the spotlight, just off to the right, perched on a low wooden stool, tapping soft rhythm on a cajon drum. His eyes were closed, head bowed slightly, lips barely parted like he might sing along if the moment caught him off guard. The lead guitarist, a lanky guy with long hair and a beanie, nodded in time. Jake smiled back, faint and real. Sarah froze. She'd seen people transform under stage lights before, how the confident ones grew louder, how the quiet ones folded inward. But Jake didn't do either. He just settled in like he belonged there, like he had nowhere else to be, like this was a version of himself she hadn't been allowed to meet until now. A woman passed by Sarah's side, whispering something to her friend. That barista's cute. Is he part of the band or just moonlighting Elaine, stacking pastries nearby? Caught the comment. She didn't react with more than a look, just raised one brow, glanced from Jake to Sarah, and let a half smile rest on her lips before walking off. She didn't say anything, but she'd seen enough in her life to know what moments to let hang. The music moved through the night. 3 sets, covers and original songs, a bit of Simon and Garfunkel, a slowed-down version of Just Like Heaven, the kind of playlist that blurred memories into something safe and sweet. Sarah didn't speak to Jake until after the chairs were stacked and the lights unplugged. She stood outside in the darkened courtyard, holding a bundle of tablecloths, her breath visible in the cooling air. The quiet, after the noise, wrapped around her gently, not lonely, just still. Jake stepped out from the back door, coat over one arm, a small hook in his hand. "You forgot this," he said. She reached for it without speaking. The string lights above them swayed slightly in the wind. The bulbs cast warm rings on the brick wall behind Jake's shoulder, giving his profile a softness she hadn't noticed before. His eyes weren't the tired ones she'd first met, and his hands, still rough from weeks of work, rested calmly at his sides. He didn't try to fill the silence. Neither did she. She stood there, one hand around the folded linens, the other still holding the hook he'd given her. Jake didn't move. And for the first time since their strange beginning, Sarah didn't feel like she had to move either. She didn't smile, but she stood still, and somehow, that felt like something was beginning. The week unfolded with quiet shifts and subtle tension. The cafe kept its usual rhythm: morning lattes, lunch crowds, leftover muffins wrapped for regulars. But something inside it had changed. Jake wasn't just a new hire anymore. People noticed him. It started small. A group of college girls from the acoustic night returned and asked for him by name. One took a photo of her coffee with him in the background and whispered to her friend, "Doesn't he look like that real estate guy? What's his name?" "Thomas." Something Sarah overheard more than she let on. She kept working, tamping shots and wiping counters. But the comments stayed with her longer than the steam on the espresso wand. Elaine didn't say much either, but her glances carried weight. That Wednesday, she casually suggested someone go to Fulton Market to buy new shelves and tableware for the patio. "Take the van," she said. "Better if two people go." But just before they left, she waved Sarah aside. "Actually, I've got a call with the city. You and Jake go ahead." Sarah didn't argue. But as she drove the van west, she felt that press of silence between them. Not uncomfortable, just charged, like two people standing under a sky about to rain, unsure if they should run or wait it out. Jake didn't force conversation. He looked out the window as the city passed brick flats, murals half faded, corner groceries with flickering neon signs. Then, as they turned onto Harrison, he spoke. "I used to walk here every day, rain or snow." He pointed to a sandstone building with rounded windows. The name etched in faded bronze: School of Architecture, University of Illinois, Chicago. "You studied here?" she asked. "Graduated in '06, before I got pulled into the family business, before all the other versions of me showed up." He didn't elaborate, but he didn't need to. The parking lot behind the building was empty. Jake leaned forward, pulling a worn plastic badge from his wallet. "They never deactivated it," he said, almost smiling. Sarah hesitated when he opened the door. "You don't have to come in," he said. But she followed him. The hallway smelled of old paper and varnished floors. The light flickered as he tapped his card. Then a soft hum buzzed through the room as fluorescent lights flickered to life. It wasn't grand, just practical. Clean lines, open ceilings. A place where people built things they believed in before the world asked them to be profitable. Jake walked slowly down the aisle of long wooden drafting tables, his hand skimming over one as he passed. "This was mine," he said, "right by the window. I used to sit here till midnight. Not to be great, just to figure things out." Sarah didn't ask what he meant. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded slip of tracing paper. "I found this the other day," he said, unfolding it with care. A pencil sketch of a footbridge light, elegant, arched like it belonged in a park somewhere far from traffic and deals. "It never got built," he said. "Too small, too quiet." "It's beautiful," Sarah said. He looked at her. "I used to want to design spaces that made people feel safe." That was before the numbers mattered more. A long silence settled between them, not heavy, just honest. On the way back, they said little. Sarah watched the streets blur by, her hands still and warm in her lap. Jake drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the sketch, folded again, but not put away. As they reached the cafe, he turned off the ignition and looked at her. That place back there is who I used to be, or maybe still am. I don't know. Sarah didn't respond right away. She opened the door and stepped out, then paused. Her eyes met his, not cautious, not guarded, just clear. Then she shut the door gently and walked toward the cafe. She didn't look back, but he knew. Something had changed. The invitation had come casually, Jake dropping it between wiping down the grinder and topping off a cappuccino. "A friend of mine's launching a book," he said. "It's at the Art Institute this Friday night. You might like it. There's art, music, free wine." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Sounds fancy." He tilted his head, half shrugged. "It might be, but you've handled worse crowds." She thought about it all week, unsure if she would say yes. But Friday afternoon, she found herself standing in front of her closet, fingers brushing the only white dress she owned. It was simple, cotton with soft pleats at the hem, bought during an end-of-season sale when she thought she might attend her cousin's graduation. She hadn't. But tonight felt like the kind of night where unused things deserved a second chance. The Art Institute was glowing. Warm light spilled from its limestone steps, and guests in silk and velvet lingered under banners that read, "The line between form and faith, launch and reception." Jake was waiting just inside, hair combed back, blazer slightly wrinkled but clean. He smiled when he saw her. "You wore white," he said. "You invited me." She replied. He offered his arm. She didn't take it, but she walked beside him. Inside. The crowd swelled with curated laughter and soft jazz. Waiters carried flutes of champagne with silver stems. Sarah stood out, not just because of her dress, but because of her stillness. Her eyes traced the edges of the room like she was memorizing exits. They passed portraits, sculptures, installations. Jake nodded to people she didn't recognize: professors, architects, editors. Most of them looked past her. One woman in a black gown leaned toward Jake and asked, "Who's she?" "She's with me," he said simply. No pride, no apology. The woman nodded once. Her eyes lingered on Sarah's shoes scuffed at the toe, leather thinning near the seam. Sarah slipped away after that, needing air. She found herself in a side gallery marked Youth Expressions, where a few children sat on cushions, dipping brushes into trays of watercolor. One little girl looked up and beamed. "I remember you," she said, holding up her painting. Two stick figures, one with a bun, the other with a coffee cup. "You're the waitress, right, from Wicker Park." Sarah knelt beside her, smiling. "That's me." "Are you and the coffee guy married?" the girl asked. Sarah laughed softly. "No, just co-workers." The girl frowned. "But he looks at you like you're more than that." Sarah didn't respond. Back in the main hall, voices rose louder. As she approached, she noticed several heads turning toward a screen near the exit. A slideshow played, cycling through black and white photos of Chicago landmarks, then faces, authors, sponsors, patrons. Then, without warning, there it was. A photo from a year ago. A man on the steps of a mansion in Gold Coast. Tuxedo still crisp, boutonniere still pinned. Alone. Behind him, a wedding arch dismantled mid-ceremony. The caption below read, "Thomas Reed, after the Hayes affair." Gasps rippled. Someone whispered, "That's him." Another voice I heard, "He disappeared." Is that really him? Sarah stopped breathing. She turned slowly. Jake Thomas stood a few feet behind her, frozen. Their eyes met. His face was pale, but he didn't move. The crowd didn't know her, but now they were staring at her, too. She stepped backward. Someone else murmured. He brought someone Jake didn't defend. He didn't speak. His silence was louder than the whispers. Sarah turned, walked toward the exit, heart pounding. Outside, the wind had picked up. Her hands trembled as she clutched her coat, not from cold, but from something harder to name, something like betrayal, something like shame. Behind her, inside the museum. Applause broke out for the author, but Sarah wasn't clapping. She crossed Michigan Avenue alone, the city lights spinning into blurs of silver and white. The drive back from the Art Institute was cold. not from the February air pressing against the windows, but from the silence inside the car. Sarah didn't ask for directions. She didn't speak. She just sat with her hands folded in her lap, eyes locked on the blur of city lights whipping past the glass. Her white dress, still immaculate in the dull street lamp glow, looked out of place now, too fragile in the company of betrayal. Thomas Jake gripped the wheel tighter than necessary. His knuckles were pale, his jaw still. Every time he looked toward her, she turned farther into the door. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice, but the space between them felt like a cliff. When the car rolled to a stop outside Wicker Park Coffee Co., Sarah finally moved. Her hand reached for the door, but she didn't open it yet. She spoke without looking at him. "Why didn't you say anything?" Thomas didn't respond at first. He stared at the dashboard, the soft orange backlight illuminating his regret. "You're Thomas Reed," she said, her voice low and dry. "I saw it. Everyone saw it. The man on the steps, the wedding that never happened, the deals, the buildings, the lawsuits." She turned her head, eyes hard now, "and the company that crushed my father's firm." He blinked, slowly, painfully. "I didn't know," he said. "Finally, I didn't connect at your name, your father. I didn't recognize him in the photo until that night you left your bag." Sarah's hand clenched the door handle. "You mean you recognized him and still said nothing?" "I wanted to," Thomas said, his voice cracking. "I wanted to tell you that first night I saw that photo. But I also wanted to believe just for a moment that I could be someone else. Not Reed, not the man behind glass walls and PR teams." She opened the door, but stayed in the seat. "My father worked his whole life building Martinez & Co. He believed in making public work beautiful stations, walkways, bridges. Reed Corp bought the land out from under him. The city rerouted the funding. My father had a stroke a year after he sold everything for pennies." Thomas dropped his head. "That deal wasn't mine. But you were part of it," Sarah said. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. Because she was right. "My mom washes dishes at a care home on 79th. She added, still calm, still devastating. "And I serve lattes to strangers who tip more for oat milk than they do for effort. But it was fine. I was fine. Until you showed up. Until you made me believe there was someone who could look at me and not see what I lacked." Thomas lifted his eyes. "That's not what I saw." "I don't care what you saw," she said, voice tightening. "I care that you didn't tell me who you were. You let me walk into that room wearing a dress I couldn't afford, and let me stand next to the reason my family's name was erased from city records." Thomas reached for the door, meaning to follow her out, to say something, anything, but Sarah had already stepped out onto the sidewalk. She turned only slightly, eyes shimmering but unbroken. "You could have told me, Jake, before anyone else did." And with that, she closed the door softly. He didn't drive away. He just sat there, hands still on the wheel, the warmth in the car turning stale. Outside. Sarah walked away without looking back, but the echo of her last words hung heavier than anything he could carry. 2 weeks passed. Wicker Park. Coffee Co. returned to its rhythm. The bell on the door rang the same way it always had. Customers came in, ordered, laughed, left. And Sarah, she smiled when needed, kept her hands busy, and stayed just far enough from herself not to feel too much. She didn't say his name, not once. Neither did Elaine. The other baristas stopped whispering after the first few days. The man they called Jake had vanished, just like that. But something wasn't gone. Every morning, like clockwork, a new delivery arrived, sealed brown boxes of Ethiopian roast, the exact brand Sarah once said made the best pour-over in the city. It was pricier than the beans the cafe normally stocked, and they weren't ordered through the usual supplier. Elaine just signed for them and said nothing. At first, Sarah tried to ignore it. Coincidence, maybe. But it kept happening. And then came the grocery bag. It was a Tuesday evening. Sarah had just gotten home from her shift. Her mom was in the tiny kitchen of their apartment on the south side, humming while unloading produce, organic kale, almonds, 2 bottles of pressed juice. Nothing they usually bought. "Where did all this come from?" Sarah asked, pulling a receipt from the bag. Her mother looked up. "A man brought it by this afternoon, said he had the wrong address at first, then just smiled and left it here. Tall, white, scar on the shoulder. Seemed polite." Sarah froze. Buried under a carton of blueberries was a folded piece of thick cream paper. No envelope, no greeting, just 7 words written in a familiar, steady hand. "I can't change the past, but I can keep it from repeating. T. Sue." She stared at the page until her mother called her name twice. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She tossed under the blanket, listening to the radiator hiss like it always did in winter. She didn't cry. She just kept thinking about the bridge collapse, about the people her father worked with, about Jake Thomas carrying trays and scrubbing the floors in silence, never asking for a chance, never offering an excuse. The next morning, she read a small headline buried in the back of the Chicago Tribune: "Anonymous donor establishes Martinez Fund for underprivileged engineering students." It was only a paragraph long, no photos, no fanfare, but the her name was there. And a quote from the anonymous founder: "Design should serve, not destroy. This fund is for those who build what lasts." She folded the paper carefully, slipped it in her coat. At the cafe, she moved through the shift like usual. Steamed milk, shot of espresso, smile, repeat. Then Elaine came up behind her. "Sarah," she said, resting a hand on the younger woman's shoulder. Sarah turned. "Yeah, he'll be here in the morning," Elaine said softly. "Asked if he could help clean out the attic. Said he wants to take care of what's been left sitting too long." Sarah stared at her. Elaine didn't push. "You don't have to come in early, but if you want to, I'll unlock the door at 6. She walked away, leaving Sarah alone behind the counter, holding a damp towel and something that felt a lot heavier than that. The attic smelled of dry wood and coffee dust. Light spilled in from the small side window, hitting old picture frames, forgotten stools, and a folded banner that once read, "Grand Opening, 1998. Thomas stood by a pile of stacked chairs, sleeves rolled, wiping the dust from his palms with a rag. He didn't look up when Sarah pushed the creaking door open. She didn't say hello, just watched him for a moment, his frame slightly hunched, the way he moved carefully, like he was afraid to disturb something fragile. Then finally, her voice low, steady. "Why are you doing this?" Thomas paused, turned to her with a quiet breath. "Because my father believed winning was the only thing that mattered. Because he taught me to close deals, not open hearts. And because I've spent most of my life too afraid to be anything else." Sarah leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, not defensive, not cold, just listening. "My whole childhood was boardrooms and charity galas, contracts with more words than I ever heard at home. The first time I saw him lie in front of a camera, I was 12. He gave a slight laugh, dry and far away. I thought it was strength. Turns out it was survival, and I copied every bit of it." He set the rag down, moved toward the stack of broken picture frames. "The day of the bridge collapse, I wasn't supposed to be there. But I took a different road, slipped in right before they shut it down, got trapped under concrete for 4 hours before the medics pulled me out. And while I lay there, thinking I was going to die, I kept replaying the meetings, the budget cuts, the silence when it mattered." His voice cracked, not loudly, but enough. "I didn't die, but something in me did, and I walked away. Not from the company, from the man I'd been." Sarah watched him the whole time. Her fingers curled lightly around the fabric of her sweater. When she spoke again, her tone wasn't soft, but it wasn't sharp either. "I lost my father to that deal," she said. "Not the accident, not the layoffs. To the years he spent believing he wasn't good enough because someone like your father told him so." Thomas met her eyes. "I know. I don't forgive you," she said plainly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever fully. But I'm tired of letting that loss be the thing that defines every room I walk into." He didn't answer, didn't nod or bow his head, just stood there, letting the weight settle between them. She stepped farther into the room, picked up a dusty tin sign from the floor fresh brew, 50 cents, and set it gently on the chair beside him. "I came up here to see if you were hiding again," she said. Thomas raised an eyebrow. She half smiled, barely. "You're not... That's something..." They didn't touch. No handshake. No embrace. But for the first time, the space between them wasn't something to guard or cross. It simply was. And they stood there, in a quiet attic above a worn cafe, surrounded by relics of another time, letting silence say what words weren't ready to hold. The walls of the Rivera Community Center hadn't changed much since the 80s. The same faded turquoise paint, the same floorboards that creaked under every excited step. But that Saturday morning, the room breathed like something new. 42 children, barefoot or in worn sneakers, were scattered across the polished wooden floor. Some sat in groups, others sprawled belly down with their pencils raised like magic wands. At the front of the room, Sarah bent down beside a boy in a navy hoodie, his fingers stained with marker ink. He was drawing a crooked little cafe with a rooftop covered in what looked like purple raindrops. "That's bougainvillea," he mumbled when she asked, without looking up. "Like in the picture you showed us." She smiled. "It's beautiful." The boy nodded. "You said, when we draw, we can make what we want exist. So I made a place where people come, even if they don't have nice shoes." Behind her. Thomas stood near the supply table, organizing boxes of crayons and rulers. He wasn't leading anything, just watching, listening, carrying boxes from the back, replacing dull scissors with sharper ones he'd brought from a friend's firm downtown. His tie was gone, his sleeves rolled, no name tag. Still, a few kids had started calling him Thay Jake, like they did in class. Sarah glanced over once. He didn't notice. He was too focused on helping a girl sharpen her pencil without breaking the lead. That afternoon, Elaine arrived with a man from the zoning office. She handed Sarah a white envelope with a yellow seal. "It's official," Elaine said. "The city approved the license. You've got the green light to use the attic." Sarah blinked, taking the paper carefully, as if it might vanish. "We did it." "No," Elaine said, looking over her shoulder at Thomas. "You started it. Now build it." When the session ended, the kids scattered into the warm daylight with paint on their hands and stories on their tongues. One little girl handed Sarah a folded napkin with a drawing of her and Thomas, standing under a banner that read, "Cafe of Dreams." As Sarah was stacking chairs, a boy tugged at her sleeve. He looked up, brown eyes wide. "Ko Gyao Sarah?" he asked. "Thay Jake, Ko Kwe Lai Tuan Sao Kong." She bent down and brushed a smudge of paint from his cheek. "He will," she said, "but he's not just serving coffee anymore." The boy nodded like he understood something bigger than she had said. Then he ran off, chasing the others into the hallway light. Sarah turned, expecting to find Thomas already gone, but he hadn't left. He stood in the doorway, holding a broom, waiting. Sunday afternoon in Edgewater was quieter than usual. The breeze off Lake Michigan carried the faint scent of cut grass, and something older, like memories, drifting beneath the surface. Sarah and Thomas walked the narrow path leading into the Rosewood nursing home courtyard, where a few residents dozed in wheelchairs and birds gathered near a shallow fountain. Sarah's mother sat alone beneath the crepe myrtle tree, arranging sprigs of daisies into an old mason jar. The visor on her head was tilted askew, a little crooked like the smile she wore when she saw them. Thomas stepped ahead, holding a woven basket filled with pears and mint tea. He didn't speak. He just walked toward her, careful, measured. She looked up at him and grinned. "Tommy, put that on the table. Would you?" The name landed like a pebble tossed into still water. Sarah froze mid-step. "Mom, what did you just call him?" Her mother paused, looked slightly puzzled. "Tommy," she said again, gentler now. "That name, it just feels right. Like I've said it before. Maybe it's from an old story. I don't know. But it sounds like family." Thomas didn't correct her. He placed the basket down, then took a step back, keeping his hands loosely at his sides. His eyes flickered, just briefly, with something unreadable. Sarah didn't say anything else. Not right then. Later, she led him to the back lawn where a wooden fence curved around a playground set installed by one of the nurses for her own kids. A few toddlers chased a blue ball across the grass. One little girl ran straight toward them, squealing. Daddy then stopped short when she saw Thomas's face. Her brow crumpled in confusion, the words still hanging in the air. For a second, the moment held its breath. Then Sarah laughed. Not a quiet smile, not a polite chuckle. She actually laughed. A sudden, real sound that caught even her by surprise. "You just got promoted," she said, nudging him lightly with her elbow. Thomas joined in, a low chuckle escaping. "I'll update my resume," he said, but his gaze stayed on her. He didn't try to hide it. They sat on the old bench by the hedge. The paint had peeled, and the wood creaked, but it held their weight without protest. Thomas leaned back, stretching his legs forward, arms crossed. Sarah sat straight, hands folded, her eyes on the slow sway of the tree branches overhead. "I don't know exactly when," she began, voice quiet but sure. "But somewhere between the lies and the letters and the coffee deliveries, I started to believe you." Thomas didn't speak. He didn't need to. His hand rested on the bench between them, close but not touching. And when the wind picked up again, bringing with it the distant clink of a nurse's tea cart and a child's laughter rolling over the grass, Sarah didn't move away. The Chicago skyline glinted like cut steel under the afternoon sun. On the 42nd floor of the Reed Holdings building, the glass walls reflected nothing but clouds and cold ambition. Thomas sat at the head of a long walnut table, suit sharp, expression still. Across from him were 5 members of the board, flanked by Vanessa Hayes and Michael Blackwell. The air conditioning hummed low. No one touched the untouched tray of croissants in the corner. Vanessa leaned in. Her voice clipped. "This whatever you're doing down there in Southside is compromising our image. Sponsors are pulling. Press is circling," Michael added. "We're trying to re-enter the interstate development game. You showing up in news feeds with paint-splattered kids and donation letters signed T. Reed doesn't help us negotiate concrete contracts." Thomas didn't flinch. "You mean it doesn't help sell an image you never believed in to begin with?" Vanessa gave a cold smile. "We believed in control. Thomas. You know that." Behind the glass doors, Sarah stood in the waiting lounge. Michael had invited her to observe, claiming transparency, but she never made it inside. She watched from a distance as Thomas faced the storm that had raised him, fed him, and was now turning on him. Inside, a board member cleared his throat. "We need your final position. You either step back from all public-facing philanthropy, or we initiate a vote to remove your name from operational power. We cannot have both Thomas Reed the Bleeding Heart and Thomas Reed the Chairman." The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was surgical. Thomas stood slowly. He adjusted his cufflinks, old brass ones, a gift from his grandfather, and looked each person in the eye. "I'm not stepping back, and I'm not asking for your permission." Vanessa shook her head. "Then consider this your final meeting here." He gave a small nod. It probably should have been years ago. He turned and walked out. Sarah straightened as he approached. There was a tightness in his jaw, but his steps were steady. The elevator bell chimed behind him. "They want you to walk away from everything," she said. Thomas looked at her, not with fire or fury, but with the calm of someone who had already burned the map and chosen to build the road by hand. "They want me to choose," he said. "Them or the truth, the company or you." Her voice was low. "And what did you say I didn't choose?" He replied, "I'm rebuilding everything from scratch." The hallway fell quiet. Only the distant murmur of phones and city traffic below filled the space. He didn't reach for her hand. She didn't ask him to. But when the elevator opened and he stepped in, Sarah didn't stay behind. The old brick warehouse on Carpenter Street had once been a cold shell, all dust and rusted rafters. Now, it was breathing again. Strings of warm Edison bulbs stretched across the rafters. On the far wall, dozens of paintings were hung edge to edge, bright splashes of crayon, watercolors, charcoal sketches. Children's names were scribbled in block letters underneath each piece, uneven but proud. The new Rivera Center stood on polished concrete floors and patched brick. Not perfect, but solid, the kind of place that stayed standing. Sarah moved from table to table, checking trays of lemonade and finger sandwiches. Her palms were damp. Her stomach refused food all morning, but her eyes never stopped scanning the room, checking chairs, corners, cables, like her father used to do at church events when she was small. Thomas stood near the entrance, sleeves rolled up, a faint paint stain still clinging to his forearm. He wasn't smiling, not quite, but his shoulders had dropped an inch. That was something. By noon, the place buzzed with voices, parents in their Sunday best, local artists, a pair of journalists from the Tribune, a councilwoman who hugged Elaine like old friends. Even Ms. Paxton from the zoning board showed up, muttering to herself about how far this place has come. Then Vanessa walked in. Her heels clicked with precision. Michael Blackwell trailed just behind, his expression neutral but cold. She made no eye contact as she crossed the room, stopping only when she stood in front of Thomas. "We need 5 minutes," she said. Sarah, from across the room, froze. But Thomas simply nodded and led them to the storage alcove behind the stage. Vanessa placed a crisp folder on the table. "Sign this. Thomas, it's a full divestment package. You step away from Reed Holdings cleanly. We'll keep your name on the company charity-friendly optics. No scandal. You get to save face," Michael added quietly, "and avoid discovery. We know what's coming." Thomas opened the folder but didn't read it. "You should sit down," he said. "What for?" Vanessa's voice was clipped. A man in jeans and a brown windbreaker stepped into the room, mid-50s, face lined like cracked leather, holding a thin file and a camera bag. "This is Louis Calder," Thomas said. "He used to be an investigator for a private equity firm downtown. Did some digging for me. You remember him from a few years back." Michael paled. Calder pulled out a document, signed affidavits, real estate transfers, falsified valuations. Specifically, land sold out from under minority communities using shell firms registered to this man's cousin. He laid them on the table like cards at the end of a long, quiet game. "You're bluffing," Michael said, voice tight. Calder opened his camera bag. "Video 2, phone call recordings. You made a lot of enemies. Counselor. Some of them were watching. For a beat, the air held no sound. Then Vanessa grabbed her bag. "This won't end here. I hope not." Thomas replied, "Because we've just started." They left without looking back. Thomas walked onto the stage without ceremony, picked up the mic, let the crowd settle before he spoke. "This building used to be hollow," he said, "just like I was. We don't pretend this changes everything, but we start here, where paint still dries on the walls, where names of kids are written under windows they helped clean. We start in the places people once walked past, like they didn't exist." He looked over the crowd, met Sarah's eyes, where she stood with her arm linked in her mother's. Neither of them cried easily, but both of them knew the weight of standing straight again. "We're not trying to save the world," he said. "We're just trying to stop it from forgetting who it left behind." Applause started like rain on a tin roof, soft, then unstoppable, under the hanging lights. Sarah turned to her mother. "It's different now." "Right." Her mother's answer was a nod and a tear she didn't bother to wipe. The library on Chicago Avenue smelled like old pages and lemon-scented floor polish. It was small, tucked between a bike shop and a laundromat. But that afternoon, it felt bigger than any gallery in the city. The walls were lined with artwork, some framed, some taped gently to corkboards, crayon sceneries, watercolor families, a paper collage shaped like a city skyline under stars. The theme was written in marker on a canvas above the display, "Things We Never Got to Say." Kids ran between exhibits, pointing out their own pieces, dragging parents by the hand. Laughter bounced off the high windows. Sarah stood near the non-fiction section, in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled, quietly guiding each child with a warmth that didn't need raising its voice. Her mother sat by the window, cheeks a little flushed from the attention. Every now and then, a child would lean into her lap, and she'd ruffle their hair like she had with Sarah 20 years ago. Then a small voice tugged at the moment. "Where's Mr. Jake?" Sarah turned. The girl had paint smudges still on her elbows, and her glasses kept sliding down her nose. She looked up like she expected the answer to be magic. Sarah didn't respond at first, but her eyes moved toward the far end of the room, near the entrance, where a man stood half hidden behind a display rack of donated books. He wore a gray, long-sleeved shirt, rolled at the forearms. No suit, no fanfare, just a worn canvas apron over his jeans, a single sticker pinned crooked on the strap, a red heart, probably handed to him by one of the kids. Thomas didn't move forward. He only raised one hand and gave a soft wave. Sarah watched him for a second. No one else in the room noticed, and that, somehow, made it feel more real. She excused herself and walked across the floor past the coloring station, past the folding chairs, past all the places where words used to get stuck. When she reached him, they didn't hug. They didn't need to. Instead, she reached for a small wooden box on the table nearby and placed it between them. "Might want to see what's inside," she said. Thomas opened the lid slowly. Inside sat a clay figure, hand-shaped, a little uneven. A woman, standing mid-gesture, with a coffee cup in one hand and a slight smile carved into her face. She wore a cardigan, like Sarah's. Around the base, etched in a shaky child's hand, was a single sentence, "To the one who stayed when no one else did." He looked up. Sarah didn't explain. She didn't need to. Around them, the library buzzed with light and voices, but between them, it was quiet. Not empty, just full in a different way. He closed the box and gently ran his thumb over the words again. And though they hadn't said it, they both knew this wasn't about going back. It was about choosing to walk forward, side by side, with whatever pieces they'd chosen to carry. She didn't look back, but he knew. Something had changed. The light in the gallery dimmed as the last visitors left, but the colors on the wall didn't fade. They stayed soft, stubborn, quietly radiant, like certain kinds of love that don't announce themselves but wait, patiently, in the background. Not to be praised, not to be rewarded, just to be real. Maybe some stories don't end when the music stops. Maybe they begin when two people choose to listen when the world isn't. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.